My name is Marguerite Ellison. I am 38 years old. And on a Thursday morning in April, 4 days before my sister's wedding, I stood at the edge of what had been, until approximately 11 o'clock the previous evening, the most important structure on my property. A 1,200 square foot glass and steel greenhouse that I had designed, financed, and built over the course of 3 years that housed a commercial botanical collection representing 11 years of cultivation work. That generated 40% of my annual income through wholesale contracts with 4 florists and a botanical garden, and that was now a field of broken glass and bent aluminum framing and destroyed plant stock that spread across the back of my 2-acre property like the aftermath of something deliberate. Because it was the aftermath of something deliberate, and I had 3 witnesses, 2 hours of security camera footage, and my sister Dominique's own voice on a recording saying, the night before it happened, that she was going to make me understand what it felt like to lose something that mattered to her. She had said it in the parking lot of the restaurant where we had all gathered for the rehearsal dinner. She had said it because I had told her, at the dinner, that I could not attend her wedding as her maid of honor, because I had discovered 3 days before the rehearsal dinner that she had, over the previous 4 months, been conducting a campaign of social undermining against me with a thoroughness that I can only describe as organized. Telling mutual friends that my botanical business was a vanity project sustained by family money, telling our mother that I had been unstable since my divorce 2 years prior, and telling her fiancé's family at a dinner I had not been invited to, that I had discovered all of this in a single afternoon through a conversation with our cousin Therese, who had been present at enough of the dinners and gatherings where Dominique had been conducting her campaign, and who had, finally and with visible discomfort, decided that I needed to know. I had confronted Dominique privately, and she had not denied any of it. She had told me that I needed to understand that the world did not revolve around me and my plants, and that some things mattered more than a greenhouse, and that if I was too fragile to handle honest conversations about my limitations, then perhaps I should reconsider whether I was really the right person to stand beside her on the most important day of her life. She had said all of this with the specific composure of someone who believes they have the moral high ground and the family narrative so thoroughly under their control that the person they are speaking to has no effective recourse. What Dominique did not know, as she stood in the parking lot of the restaurant on the evening of the rehearsal dinner and told me she was going to make me understand what it felt like to lose something, was that I had already spent the preceding 72 hours doing several things she was completely unaware of. She did not know that I had consulted an attorney named Franklin Park, who practiced in Asheville, North Carolina, where I lived, and where my property and greenhouse were located. She did not know that I had reviewed every document related to a venue booking that was central to her wedding, a booking at a property called Linden Grove Estate, a restored farmhouse event venue 12 miles outside Asheville that held 180 guests and that Dominique had booked for her Saturday reception. She did not know that the booking had been made in my name. She did not know that I had been the one to place the initial deposit of $50,000 because Dominique had asked me, 8 months earlier, with the warm urgency of a sister requesting a favor, to put the deposit on my credit card because she and her fiancé were between accounts at the time of the booking and would transfer the funds to me within 60 days, which they had not done. She did not know that because the booking was in my name and the deposit was from my card, the contractual relationship with Linden Grove Estate was legally mine, and that I had, that same afternoon, called Linden Grove Estate and spoken to the events manager and confirmed the terms of the cancellation policy and understood exactly what my options were. And she did not know that after she walked back into the rehearsal dinner, with the satisfied expression of someone who has delivered a consequence and expects it to land, I had gone home and checked my security system and confirmed that all 4 cameras covering my property and my greenhouse were recording and that the cloud backup was active. At 11:17 the previous evening, the cameras had captured my sister's car in my driveway. They had captured her getting out. They had captured her spending 41 minutes on my property. They had captured the beginning and the end and enough of the middle that the footage, combined with the damage assessment my attorney had already arranged for a contractor to conduct the following morning, told a story that was documented and time-stamped and entirely without ambiguity. I had watched the footage at 6 in the morning before I walked out to the edge of what remained of the greenhouse. I had sent a copy to Franklin Park before 7. I had sat at my kitchen table with coffee and looked at the property in the early morning light, and felt a number of things that I will not try to catalog because the catalog would take longer than the story, and because the story is what matters. I called Dominique at 8:37 in the morning. She answered on the second ring. Her voice had the particular quality of a person who has done something they consider justified and has slept well afterward. I said, "I need you to come to my property this morning." She said, "I'm busy, Marguerite. The wedding is in 4 days, and I have a fitting at 10. I said, "Dominique, the greenhouse is destroyed." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "I know." She said it the way people say things they have been waiting to say. She said, "Now you know what it feels like." I said, "I need you to understand something. Come to the property. I will show you what I need you to understand." She said she had a fitting. I said, "This will take less than an hour. Come after the fitting." She arrived at 12:45 with the expression of a woman who has decided in advance that whatever she is about to be shown is something she has already accounted for. I walked her to the edge of the greenhouse site. She looked at the damage without apparent remorse, which told me the damage had not been accidental or incidental. It had been thorough and purposeful, and she had done it with the intention of producing exactly what she was now looking at. I said, "The security cameras recorded everything from 11:17 to 11:58 last night." Her expression shifted very slightly. I said, "I have already spoken to my attorney. The contractor's damage assessment will be complete by this afternoon. The preliminary estimate is between $90,000 and $110,000 in structural and stock damage, plus lost contract income." She said, "Marguerite, this is exactly the kind of dramatic response I have been telling people about." I said, "I also need you to know something about the Linden Grove estate booking." She looked at me. I said, "The booking is in my name. The deposit was charged to my credit card. You have not transferred the funds as agreed." I spoke to the events manager at Linden Grove yesterday afternoon. Under the terms of the contract, as the booking party, I have the right to cancel the reservation. She went very still. I said, "I am giving you the opportunity to understand the situation fully before I make any decisions. I want you to understand that what happened to my greenhouse last night is documented, and what happens to your venue booking is my decision, and both of these things are true at the same time." She said, "You would not do that." I said, "I have not done it yet. I have made you aware of it." Then I walked back to my house, and I left her standing at the edge of my destroyed greenhouse, and I went inside and I made myself a cup of coffee, and I called Franklin Park. This is that story. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to stop for a moment and ask you something. Where in the world are you right now, and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. This community reaches people across every time zone and every kind of life situation, and knowing that you are out there, that these stories land somewhere real in kitchens and cars and living rooms, is the reason we come back every day to tell them. If stories about women who were targeted by the people closest to them, who lost something significant and documented every piece of it, and responded with the precision of someone who had been paying attention long before the moment of destruction arrived, if those stories mean something to you, please subscribe and leave a like. You being here is the whole point. Now let me take you back, because this story does not begin with a destroyed greenhouse or a wedding venue deposit. It begins with two sisters and a very long history of an imbalance that only one of them had been keeping track of. I am the older of two daughters of Estelle and Raymond Ellison of Charlotte, North Carolina. Dominique is 3 years younger than me and has occupied, for as long as I can clearly remember, the position of the daughter around whom the family's emotional weather organized itself. This is not a dramatic claim, it is a structural observation about how our family worked, which is the only useful way to describe it. Dominique was the one who cried loudly and was comforted immediately. Dominique was the one whose disappointments produced family response. Dominique was the one whose successes were celebrated at the volume that successes deserve, and whose failures were absorbed by the family narrative and redistributed as someone else's fault or the world's difficulty. I was the one who was told I was capable of handling things. I was told this so consistently and from such an early age that I absorbed it as a description of myself rather than as a distribution of family resources that had been decided by someone else and that I had not been consulted about. I am capable of handling things. That part is true. What I have come to understand over many years is that capable of handling things and does not need support are not the same statement, and that my family had been operating on the conflation of those two things for my entire life. I moved to Asheville at 24, after finishing a degree in horticultural science at NC State. I had been visiting Asheville since I was a teenager and had understood by my early 20s that it was where I was going to build whatever I was going to build, which turned out to be, over the course of 11 years, a botanical practice that started with a small production operation out of a rented greenhouse and grew into something that was entirely my own. 2 acres of land I purchased at 28, a house I renovated over 2 years, and the greenhouse I began planning at 30 and broke ground on at 32 and completed at 35. My divorce at 36 was painful in the way that endings of long things are painful, and I moved through it with the same capability I had been trained to apply to difficult things, which meant that I handled it without asking my family for much and that my family accordingly assumed I was fine, which was approximately true in the way that approximately true tends to be the exact measure of how much truth is available in the immediate aftermath of something hard. I was building back. The greenhouse was part of building back. The wholesale contracts I had established by 37, 4 florists and a botanical garden, generating 40% of my annual income from the production the greenhouse made possible, were part of building back. By the time of the April that changed everything, I had built back quite thoroughly and was living the specific life of someone who is deeply engaged in work they love and who has earned, through considerable effort, the physical and professional infrastructure that makes that work possible. Dominique had visited my property twice. The first time was a weekend trip 2 years before the wedding, before the divorce, when things between us were in their normal operational state, which was warm at the surface and unexamined underneath. She had walked through the greenhouse then, which was about halfway through its construction, and said it was beautiful, and that she could not believe how much I had done with the place. I had shown her everything with the particular pride of someone who rarely gets to show the people who matter to them what they have built, and she had looked at all of it and seemed genuinely impressed, which I had held on to in the way that you hold on to the moments of genuine connection in complicated relationships. The second visit was the April before the wedding, when she came to discuss the wedding plans and the maid of honor arrangements and the venue booking, and it was during that visit that I had offered to put the Linden Grove deposit on my card, because she had asked, and because she was my sister, and because I had the credit available, and because the 60-day transfer commitment had seemed like a reasonable and honoring arrangement between 2 adults. It was also during that visit that she had walked through the completed greenhouse for the first time, and I had watched her look at everything: the 1,200 square feet of climate-controlled glass and steel, the established plant collections, the propagation systems, the staging areas, and I had seen something cross her face that I could not fully categorize at the time. I understand it now. It was the expression of a person calculating the distance between what someone else has and what they have, and finding the calculation uncomfortable. I should tell you about the 4 months between the April visit and the rehearsal dinner, because they are the context for everything. Cousin Therese, when she told me what had been happening, did it in the specific manner of someone who has been deciding whether to speak for a long time and has finally concluded that not speaking is also a choice with consequences. She laid it out chronologically. In June, Dominique had told a mutual friend named Sabrina that my botanical business was a tax-advantaged hobby rather than a real enterprise, and that I had used money from the divorce settlement to fund it, which was false on both counts. The business was profitable and had been before the divorce, and the divorce settlement had not contributed $1 to the greenhouse. In August, Dominique had told our mother, at a Sunday lunch I was not present for, that she was worried about my emotional state, that she had noticed during the April visit that I seemed disconnected from reality about how much the property was costing me, and that she thought it might be worth our mother checking in on me more regularly. In October, at the dinner with her fiancé Sass family that I had not been invited to, she had mentioned my divorce with a specificity that went beyond what a mention of a relative's divorce requires, characterizing it as the culmination of a pattern of instability that the family had been managing for some time. I listened to Therese tell me all of this with the focused attention of someone receiving a damage assessment for something they did not know had been damaged. When she finished, I thanked her and I asked her one question, which was whether she would be willing to put any of it in writing. She said she would. She also told me that 2 other people had been present at various of these conversations and might be willing to do the same. I said I would appreciate that, and I would be in touch. I drove home from Teresa's house, and I called Franklin Park, and I asked for a consultation. Then I called Linden Grove Estate. Then I checked my security system. Franklin Park was 53, had practiced civil litigation in Asheville for 24 years, and had the unhurried confidence of someone who has seen enough situations to know which ones require urgency and which ones require precision, and who applies the appropriate instrument to each. I laid out the situation in our first meeting: the social undermining, Teresa's account, the venue deposit, the security cameras, the rehearsal dinner parking lot statement, and my best current assessment of what was about to happen to my greenhouse. Franklin listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You believe she is going to damage the property?" I said, "I believe she told me she was going to make me understand what it feels like to lose something. Given that she has spent 4 months systematically undermining my reputation and said it with the specific confidence of someone who does not believe she will face a consequence, yes." Franklin said, "Your security system covers the greenhouse?" I said, "All 4 cameras, cloud-backed." He said, "Keep the footage." I said, "Already arranged." He said, "The venue deposit? I want to look at the contract language." I sent it to him that evening. He called me the next morning and confirmed what I had suspected. The booking was mine, and the cancellation right was mine, and the deposit, which had not been transferred as agreed, had created a financial obligation that Dominique had not fulfilled, and that strengthened my position considerably in any subsequent conversation about the relationship between the damage she was planning and the consequence she had not anticipated. Now, if you are still with me right now, I want to pause and speak to you directly. Have you ever watched someone take aim at something you built? Something real, something that cost you years of work and significant money, and understood in advance that they were going to do it and prepared for it anyway, because the preparation was the only instrument you had? Drop a comment and tell me about it. Because the experience of watching destruction arrive and having the documentation ready is one of the most specific and strange experiences there is, and I think the people who have been through it deserve to have it acknowledged. Please subscribe if this channel has ever given you a moment of feeling seen in something that is very hard to describe to people who have not been through it. Now let me tell you what happened in the days after I left Dominique standing at the edge of the greenhouse. Franklin moved on 2 tracks simultaneously. The first was the property damage claim. The contractor's assessment came in at $97,000 in structural damage and plant stock loss, plus a lost contract income calculation based on the wholesale agreements that had been disrupted, which Franklin's office computed at an additional $22,000 over the 6-month recovery timeline. The security footage was formally preserved and documented. Teresa's written account was already in the file. 2 additional written statements from people who had been present at the October dinner with the fiancé's family arrived within 3 days. Franklin prepared a formal notice of claim that was delivered to Dominique and her fiancé by a process server on the Friday morning, 2 days before the scheduled wedding. The second track was the Linden Grove Estate booking. I had not yet canceled when I stood at the edge of the greenhouse and told Dominique about my options. I had made her aware. What I did in the 48 hours after that conversation was something more specific. I called Linden Grove Estate and spoke to the events manager, a woman named Gloria Hendricks, and explained that the booking was in my name and that I had reason to believe the event might not proceed. Gloria confirmed the cancellation policy, which allowed for a full transfer of the booking to a different event within the calendar year, or a cancellation with specific notice, and she asked whether I was considering cancellation. I said I was considering my options. She said she would note the conversation and await my decision. I thanked her and I called Franklin. Franklin said, "The notice of claim going to her Friday morning will give her information she needs to make decisions. What do you want to do about the venue?" I sat with that question. I had been sitting with it since the parking lot at the rehearsal dinner. I said I want her to understand that what she did has a consequence that is real and proportionate. I do not want to be the person who destroyed her wedding out of anger. I want to be the person who made sure the consequence was documented and real, and that she understood it was coming before it arrived. Franklin said, "That is a meaningful distinction." He said, "Cancel notice with 72-hour restoration option. If she makes restitution arrangements within 72 hours, the booking is preserved. If she does not, the cancellation is executed." I said yes. He said, "I will draft the notice." The notice went to Dominique alongside the property damage claim notice on Friday morning. I do not know exactly the sequence of events in the 2 hours after the process server left her address, but I know what happened by 11 Friday morning, which was that Dominique called me. It was the most different phone call I had ever received from my sister. The quality of her voice was different from the parking lot quality, and different from the fitting quality, and different from every version of her voice I had on record from the previous 38 years of sharing a family with her. She said, "The venue." I said, "Yes." She said, "You're going to cancel the venue." I said, "I have not canceled it yet. The notice explains the terms." She said, "Marguerite." There was a silence. She said, "I did not think you would actually do anything." I held that sentence for a moment. Then I said, I know you didn't think that." She said, "The wedding is in 2 days." I said, "I know." She said, "What do I have to do?" I said, "Read the notice, Dominique. Everything I need is in the notice." What the notice required was this: a written acknowledgement of responsibility for the greenhouse damage, an executed agreement to reimburse the documented cost of $97,000 plus the income loss calculation, structured as a payment plan that Franklin had specified in terms that were firm but not designed to be impossible, and the transfer of the $50,000 venue deposit back to me within 14 days as a separate and overdue obligation. In exchange, I would not execute the venue cancellation and I would not pursue the matter through further litigation, though the documentation would remain in Franklin's file permanently. Dominique's fiancé, a man named Marcus Webb, who I had met 4 times and who had struck me on each occasion as a more reasonable person than the situation he was now inside, called Franklin directly on Friday afternoon. Marcus and Franklin spoke for 40 minutes. Marcus asked questions that were specific and organized, and that told me he was doing his own reading of the situation with the unclouded attention of someone who had not been inside the 4 months of campaign, and who was consequently seeing the documented facts without the narrative overlay. Marcus called me directly at 5 on Friday afternoon. He said, "Marguerite, I want to understand something. All of this," he paused. "Did you know about it? The things she said to people?" I said, "I found out 3 days before the rehearsal dinner." He was quiet. He said, "I didn't know." I believed him. He said, "We will execute the acknowledgement. I want you to know that from me directly." I said, "Thank you, Marcus." He said, "I am sorry about the greenhouse." The way he said it was the way people say things they mean rather than things they are saying because the situation requires it. I said, "Thank you." The acknowledgement was executed by both Dominique and Marcus on Saturday morning, the day of the wedding. Franklin had it witnessed and notarized. The wedding at Linden Grove Estate proceeded. I was not there, which was the correct decision and the only one I had. I spent the day at my property, beginning the initial site clearing with a contractor I had worked with before, and I thought about many things while I worked alongside him, and most of what I thought about was not Dominique or the wedding or the acknowledgement. Most of what I thought about was the greenhouse as it would be, which I had already begun planning, and the plant stock I would rebuild, and the contracts I had already called my wholesale clients about, all 4 of whom had responded with a combination of sympathy and commitment to hold the relationship through the recovery timeline, which was information about those relationships that I had not had before and that I valued. Let me tell you about what happened with my family, because it is part of the story and I want to tell it accurately. My mother called me on Sunday, the day after the wedding. She had been told by Dominique a version of events that I will not spend much time on because it was a version. My mother said, "Dominique says you threatened to cancel her venue." I said, "I exercised my legal right as the booking party to notify her of the consequences of the property damage she caused." My mother said, "She says the greenhouse was an accident." I said, "The security footage and the forensic damage assessment and the recording from the rehearsal dinner parking lot say otherwise. All of these documents are in Franklin Park's file." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Was it really an accident?" I said, "Mom, it was not an accident." There was a longer silence. My mother said, "I always told you she could be difficult." I said, "I know you did." She said, "I should have done more about it." I said, "Yes, but you didn't, and I handled it." We stayed on the phone for a while longer, talking about things that were and were not adjacent to the main topic, and when we said goodbye, my mother said, "Your greenhouse was beautiful." "I'm sorry," I said, "it will be again." The rebuilding began in May. The structural work was completed by August. The full restoration of the plant stock, which could not be rushed because living things have their own timelines regardless of what happened to them, is ongoing in the way that restoring living collections is always ongoing. You establish the conditions, and you do the work, and you wait for the biology to catch up with the intention. The wholesale contracts held. A fifth contract, with a hotel group that had heard about my work through the botanical garden, came in during the rebuilding period at a value that exceeded any of the existing 4. The greenhouse, when it is complete, will be 1,500 square feet, 300 more than before, because the site clearing created an opportunity, and Franklin had included the expansion cost in the restitution documentation, and it had been agreed to. I want to say something directly to you. If you are watching this from inside a situation where someone has taken aim at something you built, something that cost you years of work and a significant part of yourself, because they believed you would not have an effective response, I want you to hear this as clearly as I can say it. The documentation is the response. The security footage, the damage assessment, the attorney's file, the written statements, the contract terms, the formal notices. These are not dramatic instruments, and they are not aggressive instruments. They are accurate instruments. They describe what happened, and they describe what follows from what happened, and they are very difficult to argue with once they exist and are properly preserved. The person who destroyed your greenhouse counted on you being too emotional or too loyal or too afraid of family conflict to reach for those instruments. They counted on the family narrative being stronger than the documented record. They were wrong about that. The documented record is always stronger than the narrative. It just requires someone to build it, and building it requires exactly the capability that your family spent years telling you you had. Use it. My name is Marguerite Ellison. I am 38 years old. On a Thursday morning in April, I stood at the edge of my destroyed greenhouse with 3 witnesses' worth of security footage and a file at Franklin Park's office and an executed agreement on the way, and I thought about the 5 wholesale contracts and the 1,500 square foot greenhouse that was coming, and I went inside and made coffee and got to work. My sister counted on me being incapable of the response I had. She had been wrong about that for 38 years. The notice of claim delivered 2 days before her wedding was the first time the error had been formally documented. It will not be the last time it is true. Tell me in the comments, has someone ever underestimated what you were capable of because they mistook your composure for passivity? What happened when they found out the difference? I want to hear about it. Every comment is read. Everyone, thank you for being here today. Every view, every share, every person who sends this to someone who is standing at the edge of something destroyed and trying to figure out what to do. You are the reason this community exists, and the reason we come back every day. We put a new story on this channel every day because there is no shortage of women who built something real and protected it with the precision it deserved. Subscribe so you never miss one. Leave a like if this story stayed with you. And if you know someone who is right now looking at something that was taken from her and does not yet know what instrument to reach for, send this to her. She will know exactly what it means. We will see you tomorrow.